Hello and welcome to another edition of From the Pastor's Heart. Today I'd like to finish this series that I've been doing on the false gods and how the gods have returned. So I'd like to begin in Romans chapter 1, and where Paul is just looking out over the city of Corinth and he's writing what he sees. And he says this, he says, "For the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men, who by their unrighteousness suppress the truth. For what can be known about God is plain to them, because God has shown it to them. For his invisible attributes, namely his eternal power and divine nature, have been clearly perceived ever since the creation of the world, in the things that have been made. And so they are without excuse. For although they knew God, they did not honor him as God or give thanks to him, but they became futile in their thinking, and their foolish hearts were darkened. Claiming to be wise, they became fools. And they exchanged the glory of the immortal God for images resembling mortal men, and birds, and animals, and creeping things. Therefore God gave them up to the lust of their hearts, to impurity, to the dishonoring of their bodies among themselves, because they exchanged the truth about God for a lie, and they worshipped and served the creature rather than the Creator, who is blessed forever. For this reason, God gave them up to dishonorable passions, for their women exchanged natural relations for those that are contrary to nature. And the men likewise gave up natural relations with women, and they were consumed with passion for one another, men committing shameless acts with men, and receiving in themselves a due penalty for their error. And since they did not see fit to acknowledge God, God gave them up to a debased mind to do what ought not to be done. They were filled with all manner of unrighteousness, of evil and covetousness, malice. They are full of envy, murder, strife, deceit, maliciousness. They are gossips, slanderers, haters of God, insolent, haughty, boastful, inventors of evil, disobedient to parents, foolish, faithless, heartless, ruthless. Though they know God's righteous decree that those who practice such things deserve to die, they not only do them, but they give approval to those who practice them." Now I want you to notice that there's a progression here. Paul says, "For although they knew God, they did not honor him as God or give thanks to him, but they became futile in their thinking, and their foolish hearts were darkened." So the ruin of a culture begins with exchanging Yahweh with a God made in the image of man. In other words, worship of Baal is where the slippery slope begins. Now, once Baal has a hold on a society, then Ishtar, his wife, makes an appearance. Therefore, God gave them up in the lust of their hearts to impurity, to the dishonoring of their bodies among themselves, because they exchanged the truth about God for a lie, and they worshipped and served the creature rather than the Creator, who is blessed forever. And then once man becomes God, then all the sexual rules and the norms change. And that is exactly what happened in our country. Now, the way Baal and Ishtar make inroads into society is through children. The last paragraph in Romans 1 is an explanation of what happens to children when Baal and Ishtar are released on a culture. They desire to pull children away from their parents, and they end up alone at the mercy of that final God that we're going to look at today. He was the most mysterious of the Unholy Trinity. There is, to this day, debate over who exactly he was. His identity belonged to the shadows, but the evil he represented could not be more stark or more brazen. He was Molech. And he shows up several times in the scriptures. In fact, when King Solomon fell away from God, he built high places and altars and sanctuaries for the foreign gods, and one of them was Molech. We find that account in 1 Kings. Now, Solomon believed the lie that he was all that and that he didn't need to do the things God's way. So he fell into the path of Ishtar, and he began to go after many women, and his foreign wives led him to sacrifice his children to the demon that convinced the people that he was a god. Nachmanides, quoting the Jerusalem Talmud, argued that the service included the father himself passing his child through the fire. The Midrash elaborates on this disturbing service. It says, how did the Molech work in the valley of Ben Hinnom? It was built outside of Jerusalem. It was an idol with the face of a calf and open hands like someone who wants to take something from another. They would light this idol on fire until his hands were scorching. There were 7 chambers before him, and according to the quality of the sacrifice, that is how close one could come to him. If one came with a bird, then chamber 1. A goat, chamber 2. A sheep, chamber 3. A calf, chamber 4. A cow, chamber 5. And an ox, chamber 6. But he who brought his child, the priest would say he was offering the greatest sacrifice, and he would enter the innermost chamber and go kiss the Molech. Then the priest would then take the child and place it near the Molech, and then they would bang with drums to drown out the cries. Now, I know that there are some who are thinking, but Dan, the gods aren't real. I mean, they're just mythology. Thinking people know that they are fiction. Well, I would remind you that the Bible calls these gods demons. The false gods are part of the powers and the principalities against whom we are fighting. Satan is real. Demons are real. And the ancient world would call them gods. Now, again, there are not dozens or hundreds of various pantheons. I would argue that there is really one main pantheon, the one that arose in the Tigris-Euphrates River Valley and spread to the rest of the world around the time of the Tower of Babel. And this is why all the pantheons are so similar. So Baal is all about self-determination. Ishtar is all about selfishness and sensuality. And Molech is all about convenience. By the time a people group is committed to Ishtar, they are completely self-absorbed. No matter how disgusting an act is, it is embraced and it must be accepted by the rest of society. But what do you do with the byproduct of your behavior? Well, prostitutes give birth to children. Children can be inconvenient. Raising children can get in the way of plans for the future. No problem. We have Molech. Molech was associated with the sacrifice of children by their parents. The very people who were supposed to protect the children would bring them to be burned on the altar of Molech in the Valley of Slaughter, just outside the walls of the city of Jerusalem. And now you may ask, well, how could parents do this to their children? Well, I would remind you that I believe that there are 3 reasons why a person would do this barbaric act. Number 1 is simply ignorance. There are some who actually believe that Molech would be able to put some pressure on the king of the gods, Baal, to give them a better harvest. And it was better that one should perish than the entire nation. The second reason would be corruption. Molech was a convenient way to get rid of a handicapped child. A child of prostitution was passed through the fire, so the father would not be responsible. Molech was a way for a person to virtue signal how great they were and get rid of an unwanted child at the same time. And then, of course, number 3 is fear, which I believe was by far the most common reason a father or mother would willingly murder an innocent child. Now, I don't want to think about how many children were murdered during the drought that Elijah decreed. I mean, what do you do when you are faced with the irate parents who are accusing you of selfishness by withholding your child when they gave theirs to the fire? Peer pressure is a powerful force. You are the reason that grandma is dying. We have no rain because you are selfish. We're all in this together. I mean, do you think that you are better than everyone else? By withholding your child, you are telling me that I was wrong. After all, it's not as though children are worth as much as an adult. You see, there was a reason for the ecstatic worship and the banging of the drums. It was to drown out the screams of the children, and it would allow the parents to ignore what they have done. Folks, Molech is a demon. And he's a demon who wants to kill and torment children. But he can only do so with the help of parents. And folks, Molech is alive and well today. I would argue that the worship of Baal and Ishtar is so prevalent in America that no one notices. But Molech is different. The offering to Molech is the most precious of all the sacrifices, and it will be protected at all costs. Sacrificing children is the holiest of all the acts of service and worship to the Unholy Trinity. Last time we were together, we noted the beginning of the sexual revolution. This revolution was determined to throw off the tyranny of repression that was the mark of devotion to Yahweh. The shackles of Judeo-Christian morality must be thrown off if humans were to reach their fullest potential. And nothing says freedom like being able to have sex with anyone that we want to just because we feel like it. But there's a cost. You see, every time two people engage in sexual activity, there is the possibility of conceiving a child. And that was the problem for the enlightened classes. So what do? Well, Molech has the answer. Sacrifice your child on the altar of Molech. Pass them through the fire and you will be free to follow your desires. Prior to Roe v. Wade, 30 states prohibited abortion without exception. 16 states banned abortion except in certain special circumstances, such as rape or incest and health threatened to the mother. 3 states allowed residents to obtain abortions, and New York allowed abortions generally. But this was unacceptable to the followers of Baal and Ishtar. Molech must be added to their duo to make a complete trinity. And on January 22nd, 1972, by a 7-2 majority, 5 of which were appointed by a Republican president, the Supreme Court legalized worship of Molech. According to Fox News, over 65 million children have been murdered since the passing of Roe v. Wade in America. And folks, I'm convinced that women offered their children on the altar of Molech for the same 3 reasons, that no one stood up to stop the worship of Molech in the ancient days. Number 1, many are simply ignorant. I find this to be true, especially when I listen to young people talk about abortion. See, Planned Parenthood discovered that a significant percentage of women who view an ultrasound don't follow through with the murder of their baby. And so that if you look at an ultrasound, then the odds are that you're going to keep your baby. About 80% actually. And so the priests and the priestesses of Molech will do anything to keep a woman ignorant of what happens during the abortion. And they will use words like just a clump of cells, it's whatever, but it still comes back to, and that we can just keep people ignorant. Number 2, there's too much corruption. Folks, many men will pressure a woman to abort so they will not be inconvenienced with a child or child support. Murder Inc. at Planned Parenthood and other abortion mills they make way too much money. I mean, don't forget that the founder of Planned Parenthood stated over and over again that she wanted to eradicate the black race. So folks, I mean, if Black Lives Matter really cared about black lives, they would work to shut down the organization that murders more black babies than any other organization, the most racist organization on the planet known as Planned Parenthood. Corruption. And number 3, I believe that most people, and especially politicians, do not speak up or call this barbaric act what it is, murder. It's because they're afraid. They're afraid that they will be called right-wing conservative Christians, or worse, that they hate all women, that they are somehow anti-science and a host of other pejoratives. Some scholars believe that not every child that was sacrificed to Molech died on the altar. They believe that some may have survived the ordeal, but all were left with the scars. And many refused to live with the stigma and the pain, and eventually they killed themselves. Because Molech always gets his pound of flesh in the end. Today, parents don't always take their child in to be murdered. They allow and they even encourage them to mutilate their bodies. Too many parents join with the evil groomers in the school system and the mental health system to convince their children that God made a mistake when he formed him or her in the womb. And so children who can't buy a package of cigarettes or a 6-pack of beer, who can't drive a car or open a bank account by themselves, are told that they can determine that boys are girls and girls are boys. And if you disagree with them, you are the problem. Statistics tell us that well over 85% of children stop believing that they are the opposite sex by the time they become adults. In fact, a significant percentage would not even pursue the transitioning if it weren't for the narcissistic parents or the corrupt counselors and educators encouraging them. In other words, the worshipers of Molech. There are pride and transgender flags everywhere you look in public buildings and even in churches. Now, if you were to replace the pride flag with a Nazi flag, you would swear that you were living in Germany in the late 1930s. Now, folks, I praise God that in the past 12 months since Roe has been overturned, over 3,500 babies have been saved in America. But Molech is still getting the children he craves. Because remember, his goal is to destroy children, and he uses the adults who are supposed to protect them to do his bidding. So why are children so valuable to the Unholy Trinity? Well, I believe that there are two reasons. First is that if you get the minds of the children early, then you can shape society at large for good. And this is why so many modern day despots went after the young first. Hitler, Mao, and Marx all began with young people in their quest for power. Now, the second reason I believe children are so valuable to the Unholy Trinity comes from Jesus himself. Matthew records for us a conversation that Jesus had with his disciples. They wanted to know who was going to be greatest in the kingdom of heaven. And Matthew records this for us in Matthew chapter 18, beginning in verse 1. It says, "At that time the disciples came to Jesus, saying, 'Who is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven?' And calling to him a child, he put him in the midst of them. And he said, 'Truly I say to you, unless you turn and become like children, you will never enter into the kingdom of heaven. Whoever humbles himself like this child is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven. And whoever receives one such child in my name receives me. But whoever causes one of these little ones who believe in me to sin, it would be better for him to have a great millstone fastened around his neck and be drowned in the depth of the sea.'" You see, folks, children model the kind of trust that we need to have as we walk with God. Children have faith that adults simply don't have. And this is what I believe makes child abuse and child exploitation so evil. Satan wants to pervert and ruin any beauty that God creates. And if he can corrupt children, then he can hurt God. And so we need to continue, folks, as Christians, we need to continue to choose this day whom we will serve. We need to understand that these false gods are there and that they are powerful and they are at work in our society. And we need to say, hey, no more, at least not. There has to be some place where there's some safety. And I would hope that that would be in the church. So if you are watching this and if you are attending a church and that church will not do whatever it can to protect the weakest among us, go somewhere else. That is not a church that is honoring God. And I don't say that lightly, but folks, it is absolutely true. And because the only way to fight this unholy trinity is with the truth. Satan is a liar. We need to bring the truth of who God is. And we need to not enter into their delusion. People who are following these false gods. Jesus said, you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free. Nobody is entitled to their own pronouns, for example. Do not buy the premise, a biological male is a boy, a biological female is a girl. Boys can look like girls, but they cannot become girls. This is truth. And the reason this is so important is because when a child discovers that transitioning will not make them happy, they will remember the one who loved them enough to tell them the truth. Folks, the truth is that a life inside of a person is a life. It is a distinct, separate life. That is science. And we need to protect that life at all costs. Now, folks, we need to remember that Baal and Ishtar and Molech offer freedom, but they deliver slavery and death. Jesus is the one who came to set the captives free. And so we must be committed to telling those who are dead in their trespasses and sins that Jesus came to bring salvation and forgiveness, that he is more powerful than the false gods, and his blood is able to cleanse even the most stubborn stain. So let me end with this, folks. The gods are back. Things will get worse. And adults, we must protect our children at all costs. The good news is that we are one day closer to the return of Jesus. But until he comes, we must do all that we can to fight against the schemes of the devil. We will not be liked. We may pay a price. But the only words that matter are, well done, good and faithful servant. Enter into your rest. So I thank you for making it to the end of this video, and I pray that as you gather together with your siblings in Christ, as you're worshiping this week, that you would have a wonderful time, that you would really sense God's presence. And I look forward to seeing you again in a future video. God bless y'all.